Tonight, I'm very excited that we're going to be having Grant and Mike talk about North Fulton Aries. Being charged with getting the programs, one of the things I did was we polled the executive committee and some of the members, and two of the ones that actually came up was last month's meeting, but the one that came up the most was people wanting to learn more about Aries. So I'm very happy when I asked them to do it, they jumped at the chance, just said, give us one more month, we'll do it in February. So it worked out great. You probably all know Mike and Grant, and I won't take very long. I know Grant got licensed in 2013, and in just 4 years, he's become an integral player in club activities. And he stepped right in as the emergency coordinator for North Fulton Aries when Mike Birmingham got redeployed or reemployed, and Grant aptly stepped in and has done a great job. He does net control for the Sunday night Aries net at 8:30 on the 14706 machine. You see him around at field day with all the participation of the emergency vehicles and the activities that are there, and does a great job for us. Mike has always been, since I've been in the club, which has been a while, it seems to be always in some form of leadership with North Fulton Aries. He does the school roundups and school support, which is outside of the realm of emergency, but he's an all-around doer for ham radio in the club. And I call him the digital guru and mentor. He's been spanning the Atlanta radio clubs, giving FT8 presentations, as he's sort of a pioneer in that. And he doesn't talk much about it or brag much about it, but I think it was 2 months ago on the phone for about an hour and a half, he walked me through and got me on FL Digi. I was struggling with that for about 3 months, and took him about 45 minutes to get me on the air, so I appreciate that. And also in 2013, he was the North Fulton Amateur Radio League Ham of the Year. So I will turn it over to our Aries guys, and I know we have a lot of support here. Good to see everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good evening. I'm Grant Register, KK4 PCR, Emergency Coordinator for the North Fulton Aries. And thanks for the opportunity to allow us to tell you more about our group. And also thank you for your support. Before I begin on the slide presentation, allow me to tell you how I got in this position. When I began to plan for retirement, my wife said, "You've got to find a hobby." Y'all have probably heard that. As I began to ponder this, I realized I had always been interested in radios. Like most of you, when I was 14, I built a ham radio receiver, or a shortwave receiver. While I did not become a ham, mainly due to the code, nevertheless, I was hooked on radios and the world of electronics. I thought about ham radio as my hobby, so I bought a book and started to read. I first attended the Atlanta Radio Club, which is a smaller group, and then I found the North Fulton group. At the first meeting that I came to here, I met Jim Stafford, W4QO, and he recommended that I visit a longtime friend of his, Tom Cope, W4UOC, who lived in my neighborhood. That was an exceptional recommendation for me. Tom became my Elmer, friend, and sounding board. He helped me buy most of the equipment that I have, most of which is used. There we go. But works great. At that time, Tom was the emergency coordinator for the North Fulton Aries, so naturally I joined his group. Aries seems to me to be the practical side of amateur radio, and it gives amateur radio a purpose. Being part of Aries allowed me to meet lots of great people. One of those is my partner here in the presentation, my Cohen 84MC. and in my humble opinion, a star in the North Fulton Club. We would again like to thank Northville for allowing us to be a part of the great club and for their support. Now let's go to the slides. I think this mission statement is a perfect description of amateur radio emergency service. Most of our work during the year is community events, which allows us to educate the public on ham radio and how it can serve the community. Later on in the presentation, you'll see some of the events we support. We are affiliated with the Amateur Radio Emergency Service of the American Radio Relay League and a special interest group for the North Fulton Club. You can find us on the North Fulton website. We participate in local and statewide ARES nets, both on VHF and HF, which are usually held on Sunday afternoon. Georgia ARES have both voice and digital nets, which y'all probably know. The state single sideband net is held on Sunday afternoon. And Charles Pennington, who probably most of y'all know, is a longtime ham in Sandersville, Georgia, and he calls that net on 3.975. You can find all this information by visiting the Georgia ARES website. Who we are repeats what we said in the mission statement. We are volunteers, and this allows us to support the community, and it helps us practice our radio skills. By doing this, we are able to check our equipment to make sure it is working properly and to help us practice following FCC protocols and procedures. As most of you already know, our group has meetings on the second Tuesday of each month from 7 to 9 at the Fellowship Baptist Church on Crossville Road in Roswell. Mike sent out a link of this presentation, and hopefully you got it. If you didn't, we've got handouts for you, and we probably will send it out again. But please notice that presentation, that the blue text that is underlined is a link. We hold our nets on the we've already said this, but we hold our nets on the 14706 repeater if it's active, and it is most of the time. But if it's down, we hold it on the 14547 repeater. You can also check in on Echolink. The format for the net is to first allow check-ins, and then there's an alternate net control, and the alternate net control goes back through the check-ins for comments and also takes digital messages. By doing this, we're able to maintain our skill with the digital modes, and we usually use FL-Digi, and the specific mode is MT63 2000L for our messages. But there are lots of other modes. Another member, Brett, his call sign is N4BTA, usually has a gateway for packet and WinLink at his home in Alpharetta to use for our Sunday night nets if you want to try that. As I stated in the beginning, I am the emergency coordinator for North Fulton. You may ask, what is an emergency coordinator? In my opinion, the EC is the official contact point and representative for the group. I am not the most senior, nor the most knowledgeable. I got to the EC position like most volunteers. When they asked for volunteers, everybody took one step back. I think that's a military way of doing it. Um, The assistant emergency coordinators are very important members of the group and have key roles to play to make the group viable. You can see from the slides that we have some vacancies in the city of Dunwoody, Johns Creek, and Milton. As a part of our group, I'd also like to recognize Tony, who usually attends front desk, K4AWF, our group scribe for keeping our records and web notices. As you can see from this slide, we're looking for volunteers, so please sign up. We hope this presentation stimulates you to join our group. If it does, you may have questions, but don't worry. Through the guidance of Stephen Hall, KW4HQ, who is the Tech Talk doctor, we created a North Fulton Aries handbook that will guide you through the process. It is a cloud-based document with lots of links that cover almost every aspect of our group, from how to join to how to set up your station to do digital modes. It is a treasure trove of information. We would also appreciate your feedback on the handbook so we can continue to improve it. This is one of the events we provide radio communication. It is the Georgia 400 Hospitality Bike Ride. We're going to show you a 2-minute video about the bike ride. If you pay close attention, you might see some people you know at about the 1 minute and 53-second mark of the clip. Starts very early in the morning. Grant, bring it to my please.
10 volunteers. The riders will ride 92740. 5, 62, and 101 mile routes and visit 7 rest stops.
We're 23 miles into a 45-mile ride. It's a cool Sunday morning with friends. Everybody's out here. Why aren't you?
Most will tackle the Three Sisters, 3 challenging climbs near the end of their ride.
We just tackled Big Sister number 1, 32 miles down, 13 to go.
And all riders will tackle what we call the mother-in-law, a climb right before the finish as they enjoy their ride as they started on Georgia 400.
On a bike and training with me. She just completed a 65 metric centimeter, 64 to 65 metric centimeter, and she did really well.
So thankful for Gospel Bicycles and Junior Flyers. Thanks to the police department for all their assistance, and it was a great time.
As you can see, the beginning of this race, they closed Highway 400, or Georgia 400. It's early in the morning, and I think they close it for about 30 minutes. This is a fun event for our group, and we appreciate the volunteers. There have been several volunteers from Norfolk that have helped us in the past. It's a full-day event, and some of the 7 rest stations we have to divide into 2 shifts, morning and afternoon. Since it's in July, it's very hot. A full day of talking on the radio is a bit much, but you do get a t-shirt. Back mic. This is the assignment sheet that I sent out for the bike race. The handy-talkies seem to work well for the event, and as you can see down at the bottom, we use the 440 repeater for our communications. The bike ride begins at 7:30. It's an early start. We have to get there well before that. It has 7 rest stops where the volunteers are posted. We usually have motorcycles that tour the course to report activities, accidents, lost riders, and just to give status updates. There are usually 2 SAGs, and SAG stands for support and gear, vehicles that are provided by the event sponsors. Last year there were 1,600 riders. There are 5 different routes, with the longest being 62 and 101 miles, which is a long ride. Excuse me, Mike has to remind me that it's a bike ride, not a bike race. The last riders finished the 101 route at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so we've been there from about 6 till about 4 o'clock. So it's a long day. By having the radio communication, it allows all the volunteers to be kept apprised of the progress and the activities during the race. Here are 2 photos, one of the net control station, Larry, AA4QO, which is at the start-finish line, and the other guy's a little bit hard to see, but that's Tim, K4RA, who is also our safety officer during field day. Another guy I'd like to mention who was particularly dedicated until the very last rider came in last year is Scott, KM4 JXE, who owns and operates the unofficial print company for the club. Next slide. Another event we encourage the members to support is the Peachtree Road Race. As you know, this is a very large event, and I think they have rest stations at each, or refreshment stations at each mile of the 6.2 mile event. Last year, I think Larry was at the start-finish line, and a runner collapsed right at the start-finish line. Fortunately for him, he didn't have to use his radio. There was a medical staff there, and I think that you said they had to basically bring him back to life.
Yeah.
Luckily, we didn't have to pass any radio traffic, but from that you can see that radio communications could be important. With that, I'm going to turn the middle part of the presentation over to my more experienced friend, Mike Cohen.
It's okay. Thanks, Grant. As Grant said, these activities really help us practice. So there's a lot of practice and preparation. Now that I'm saying that, this event, the Sandy Springs Fireworks, is 100% fun. So sometimes you do the practice, I got to back up a little bit. This is probably the first presentation we've done that's been given in 2 languages. I'm speaking in English, and Grant's just been speaking in Southern. So we'll continue in English for a while. This particular event really is a lot of fun. We have the ham radio operators. We had 16 of them with 19 more family friends with them, and we're on the top decks of the parking garages, and also by the Publix supermarket there. Tim and Martha were by Publix. Hey, there's Tim. Oh, by the way, Tim also was at the bike ride. How many miles did you ride on that?
The metric.
The full 100. Tim's done 100.
Metric.
Oh,
62.
oh, 60, sorry. But anyways, he's comes in kind of sweaty by the end of that. So anyways, with this particular event, I say it's one of the hardest events because they shoot the fireworks up and everybody knows what goes up must come down. And our job is to liaison with the fire department. If any of the hot embers come and start a brush fire, we contact them and they knock it down quickly. The fact is that hasn't happened and everybody's looking up and it's just a party. So that's really a good event. July, not 4th, it's the closest weekend to July 4th. All right, this one I'd like to spend quite a bit of time on. This is more practice. The Sandy Springs sponsors a free community event and an opportunity for the surrounding community and visitors to celebrate the river, Chattahoochee of course, at one of Sandy Springs' most beautiful parks. People spend several months building these papier-mâché lanterns. They're all LED lighted for safety. That they gather at Morgan Park, right off Roswell Road, start when it's dark at 9:30. And there's about 2,000 people that will march down to the river with it. This should be totally carefree. It should be totally fun. It should be totally easy for radio communications. There's going to be a few twists in this. There's another video I'd like to show you. This is just noise, so that's okay. There's no talking in this one. And you might want to keep it down because I may talk over a little bit. That's that same fish. Okay, this is the golf club at the top of the hill at Morgan Falls Park. And you can see how elaborate, you can see how elaborate some of these are. Just want to point out that they start at 9:30, very dark. The road is totally unlighted. Again, that's the club, the golf club where they're starting. Quite a mass of people. Lots of kids, lots of strollers. Lots of people. This is in the park. This is at the bottom, near the end of it. Doesn't everybody wish they had their own vacation? I wish I were that creative. They actually put some of them in the river, and you may be able to tell there's some people paddling on surfboards to navigate them. Right there is one of the paddlers. Okay, so we're not chronological. This is in June, so it's before the July event. Wayne, KG5W, and I were scoping this out. So Wayne drove it, and this is a half mile from Roswell Road to the start, which was the golf club, and it's another 3/4 of a mile. Is this okay, Steve, here? This little, another 3/4 of a mile to the hooch to get down there. So everybody gathers here, about 2,000 people, and they all march here. A couple other things. I took a GPS program with me, and just for the fun of it, checked it out. And Roswell Road's about 908 feet above sea level. This is where the incident command, the IC tent, is set up. That's where police, fire, and ham radio communications are all established right here, 875 feet. The clubhouse, or the golf club rather, is 925 feet, and the route down, so the hooch, is 800 feet. So that should be duck soup for HTs to make a communication like that. Maybe not. And again, I was saying how we were practicing. Well, anybody remember what happened back in June of 2017? Sadly, that was the time of the London terror attack. And police departments throughout the United States and throughout the world were also using events like this to practice their anti-terrorism. So we're practicing how to use radios, they're practicing anti-terrorism, and they want to make it as transparent to the people involved as possible. What they weren't really realizing, and the walkers didn't know, there were several large barriers, large orange barriers that were filled with water. And the purpose of those barriers is to keep bad guys from driving and doing bad things. So they were actually practicing with that. They had the bomb-sniffing dogs checking out the entire route, and there was quite a police presence. Very quiet, very subtle, but they were doing a lot of practicing. So what do we do as radio? So we just have our walkie-talkies and we're talking. I mean, big deal. What are we doing? It was the fire department that asked us to be there with the police department. This 925 feet, you start high, you do a nice 125-foot walk down the hill to the hooch. That's at 9:30. 10:30, you got to walk back up 125 feet. You got the strollers, the tired kids, the elderly people. The police and fire were very concerned that their 911 system would be overloaded because so many people would be asking for help. We actually had 2 golf carts. We had a shuttle bus that we were communicating with all the people. Every number is somebody on the route. So we were commuting with the fire department that had the golf carts and the company that had the shuttle bus, and we were getting the people up and down the hill. So we did reduce the load of 911 calls. Obviously, if there's a real problem, they want to act on that immediately. But the goal was to use our communications to help reduce that. Okay, what do you know about ham radio or just radio communications? Let's talk about this. We've got the incident command at 875 feet. The start right here is at 925 feet, and the end is 800. Radio signals don't like to go through dirt. And when Wayne and I tried it out, him at the IC, and I was down at the end, so scratchy we couldn't talk. And he had a mobile station, I had an HT, it just didn't work. So communications was not going to work with HTs. So Jim QO likes to talk about ham ingenuity. I got permission to park my car right here at the club area, golf club. I've got a crossband repeater in my car. So Wayne was able to talk on 440 to reach my car, which was close. But my car would repeat that on 2 meters. We could easily communicate, and it was crystal clear communication. So you have to practice, but you also have to prepare. And if we hadn't scoped that out and tried it, we would have failed in our communications. And it was our job to try to lower the 911 calls. We got tremendous appreciation from the police and fire for our being there. So it was a truly fun event, but it was not a simple one to do. You would think it would be for a half mile plus 3/4 of a mile. Plus it was dark, so we had a bunch of flashlights. So it was a truly fun event, but we felt that we were doing something useful. Field Day. Allow me to just read this paragraph because it comes from the ARRL. Field Day is a ham radio's open house. Every June, more than 40,000 hams throughout North America set up temporary transmitting stations in public places to demonstrate ham radio science, skill, and service to our communities and our nation. It combines public service, emergency preparedness, community outreach, and technical skills all in a single event. Field Day has been an annual event since 1933 and remains the most popular event in ham radio. It's great. It's certainly not an Aries event, but it's a total ham radio event. Lots of fun, lots of chances to show what we can do. John and Ian isn't here tonight, but asked us to do an Aries to represent the North Fulton Aries here. So we set up a couple of tents, staked them to our vehicles. There's some pretty heavy winds, if you remember. We didn't want them lifting up like we just didn't want to be floating. So we got a nice antenna there. There's another vehicle that Jim, I'll talk about a minute about that, but this particular vehicle has a little box on top, which is kind of significant. Okay, that vehicle is the Alpharetta Department of Public Safety, and I saw Jim. Where did Jim go? Oh, there you are. So Jim, for the last couple of years, has been able to coordinate bringing that to us. This vehicle is pretty amazing. Not only does it have police and fire radio equipment in it, it's fully equipped with amateur VHF and UHF. I think it has D-Star too.
That's right.
Okay, but it's a fully equipped thing, and it's June, if you remember. Field Day was pretty hot. That little white box is an air conditioner. So that vehicle was very popular for guests spending more time than they would have, because I don't know how much the interest was in the equipment or cooling off.
Crowded.
It was pretty crowded for the day, but that was pretty impressive to have that brought there. I think it's pretty significant when ham radio and a city link so well. So for the city of Alpharetta to actually invest in ham radio equipment in their public service and public safety vehicles, a tribute to Jim and the Alpharetta staff. This is the second year that the ARRL is really focused on safety. And you say, duh, why didn't they do that all along? But Tim, K4RA, has been the safety officer for 2 years. If you know Tim, you know he's really an expert in this field. And if he tells you that you need to have a fire extinguisher mounted to the antenna mast, then I'm going to have a fire extinguisher mounted on the antenna mast. And he also made sure we were well hydrated and just followed other safety things. So he's a real tribute to the group by doing that. The ARRL actually gives bonus points for doing certain things, and there's 100 bonus points, which of course we earned by having Tim do that for us. This is a group that was setting this up, Grant, KK4PCR, Mike K4LJG, myself, and Fred, KK4JYO. Mike Birmingham didn't get the message of the uniform of the day. Forgive him. We're actually very grateful to see Mike there. As John mentioned briefly, he has a job and several family issues that take virtually all of his waking hours. So even though he was our emergency coordinator, he just couldn't come to our meetings and be involved with us. So we tried to cover for him for several months. We did that. And Grant very modestly says he was volunteered. Grant raised his hand and on his own volunteered to be our acting emergency coordinator, thinking it would be a couple of months. It wound up being about a year, I think. It was a long time. And Mike wanted to be the EC. He didn't want to give it up. But after about a year, he contacted Grant and said he doesn't see any light at the end of the tunnel. And Grant again volunteered to be a full-time EC. So he did that. And just so you know the type of guy that Grant is, he even told Mike that if you can come back, because he knew how hard it was for Mike to give it up, he says, you can have it back. So speaking for myself and for the others, I applaud you, Grant, for doing that. Thank you. Okay, this is a blast from the past. Stuart's here, and this is from 2014. Stuart had a very nice setup with his solar panel showing how he could actually run the station with solar power, charging up the battery and running the equipment. We also had a Go Kit set up, a full digital system with a laptop. This monitor is only for making it easier for the guests to see it. If you do take a look close-up of that screen, we're actually setting up to send a message by RF to email. So we're actually communicating with a station about 14 miles away, simulating that we've got no phone, no internet, and we're actually by RF sending an email through the WinLink system. This is a close-up of that. We actually got another 100 points for doing this. You have to send it by RF, not necessarily through email, but we use the WinLink email system to send it to David Benoist, AG4ZR, who's the section manager for Georgia. And this specific information is where you're having it, how many people, and so forth. So by sending that radiogram, and it has to leave the site by RF, it cannot leave any other way, we got another bonus point, 100 points. And we got 100 bonus points by exchanging 10 digital messages. They had to be digital messages by RF. So we had a couple of simplex stations set up, and I think Stuart actually sent that one to us. So we got 100 points for that, 100 points. We also got 100 points for copying the ARL bulletin for that, but that's a little bit separate. Of course, we have to provide our own power, and we have to treat our generators with TLC. I can't tell you how much ribbing I've had on that, but that little generator is a workhorse, and you've got to take good care of it. Anybody wants to know how to mount that, I'll show you the tricks on that. All right, for real emergencies, it does take preparation. I mentioned that radio signals don't like to go through dirt. They don't like to go through steel buildings. They don't like to go through brick and cinder block buildings. So we started this about 10 years ago. Tom W4UOC got us started. And we've got every Sandy Springs fire station with an outdoor antenna. And the Sandy Springs actually has radio equipment in the stations. So we can just go and be able to communicate with that equipment. This is at the Sandy Springs Police Headquarters. You see a police car a little bit here. And we commandeered the Sandy Springs Fire Rescue to bring their aerial ladder to make it easy to get up on the roof. So with Fred and Clyde, that's king of the roof there. This is the antenna before we neatly trimmed all the coax, but the police headquarters has a radio station set up. This is at Johns Creek. John and K4SQC is handing an antenna up to the poor soul in the bucket. This was Fred, John, and myself. We took a very democratic vote, and it was 2-1 against me. So I was the one up in the bucket. Seems like that happens every time. The antenna is already mounted. This is actually, you can't tell, but that's one of the firefighters that helped us. He was actually on the roof with us. I'm waving with my right hand, which you may not be able to tell is how tightly I'm grasping that bucket with my left hand. So I'm not thrilled at being that high, but we've got a lot of stations set up properly. Jeff Scarborough was the fire marshal for Sandy Springs. He's been promoted. He's now fire chief for Athens. But he actually got his ticket while we were with him. He was very supportive of KK4 ATX. And they purchased 2 full systems to put in 2 battalion commander vehicles. And they were, at the time, the best radios that we could find. The ICOM 2820 D-Star radio, but also crossband repeater. And this monitors for their equipment, not ours. They also bought the ID92AD ICOM portable, or HT, which is waterproof. Good idea for firefighters to have waterproof radios. What's really interesting about that is we use that in several places, like the emergency room of St. Joe's Hospital. And if they took the HT into the hospital and had the vehicle right outside, we could crossband repeat to the 911 call center in Sandy Springs. Our equipment worked better than theirs. The reason is they've got their HTs, they call them portables. They're Motorola units, like $7,000 a pop. Good radios, probably, I don't know how many watts, 5-7 watts. But if they're inside a building like the emergency room of St. Joe's Hospital, they got to get to their tower. And it doesn't work as well. We only have to get out to the vehicle, which is parked right outside the building. So it was pleasantly surprising that we were able to provide better, more reliable communications back to the 911 call center than they could with their own equipment. So there's been a pretty long positive relationship with Sandy Springs Fire Rescue and Sandy Springs Police. Once a year we have a simulated emergency test, SET, and we have stations set up at EOCs, Emergency Operations Centers. NCS is the net control station. Here's Stuart again at Sandy Springs 911 call center. When we do this, we set it up using simplex. Paul, where's Paul? Paul asked, Paul was here a little bit. Oh, there you are, okay. Paul on Tech Talk yesterday said, well, what do you do about repeaters and generators and power? Our favorite 4547 repeater on Sweat Mountain doesn't have generator backup. If they lose power, we lose that repeater. 706 repeater does have a generator, but it hasn't been all that reliable. It's gone down on us when we've needed it. So when we do the simulated emergency test, we use the repeater if it's available. Why not? But we demonstrate that we can get from the 911 call center to every fire station and hospital in Sandy Springs, Johns Creek, and Dunwoody on Simplex. So we've demonstrated that we can provide reliable, consistent communications from there. And what you can't tell from here, but the actual 911 dispatcher is in the next room over. So if they did lose their communications, they call it chatcom, if theirs went down, we could actually provide true communications to the served agencies directly over ham radio. We've done that for several years. They know we can do it. Since it's a simulated emergency, we get to choose what the emergency is. And our favorite to choose is a tornado. And the reason why we like to choose it is we determine exactly when it arrives and exactly what path it takes. So it very coincidentally goes through all the cities that we're serving. So that when we want it to. So we've done that several times. That's our typical way to do it. Has anybody heard about Hurricane Irma? Yeah, we heard about that. We were in direct contact with Sandy Springs Fire Rescue for several days. I forgot how many days, but once it looked like Irma was coming our way, we started communicating with them, and they said they wanted us to see if we could round up volunteers so that if it was a serious hit, and it was looking like it would be, we would actually be pre-stationed, pre-deployed rather, in each of these stations, 911 call center. And I was a little leery of that. I said, well, gee, can't we come if you lose it? No. It's like having a UPS on your computer or something. You don't plug it in once you lose power. They wanted us there so that we could instantly help them with dispatch if they lost communications and power. Most of the stations have generators, so power wasn't a problem, but they could lose communications. So for several days we were recruiting, and this is the actual email that we sent out in the morning of 9/11, which was Monday. That's the day Irma came to us. And if you let me just read it to you, Sandy Springs Fire Rescue Battalion Chief Wilbanks just called requesting that we deploy at this time to the Sandy Springs 911 call center and fire stations number 51, 52, and 54. This request is extended to Sandy Springs Police Headquarters. The concern is that by 1500, 3 o'clock today, we could have power outages and chatcom communications problems. We're being asked to arrive before 1500 today and be set up by that time. We were there by noon. Arriving noon today would be even better. That's what we did. This deployment is expected to be continuous until 1500, 3 o'clock on Tuesday, unless extended. So we're requesting 8-hour shifts. So that was 11 o'clock in the morning. We already had 31 volunteers ready to go. Here's a list of the volunteers. We've got a link here. When you look at this, if you're interested, it's the list of the people, and this spreadsheet extends out pretty far because it had all the locations and each 8-hour shift for each of the people that could do this. And we were prepared to go for a lot more than a day if we had to. But we actually had 14 people deployed. We put in 158 volunteer hours. And this was our simulated test or real emergency test this year. For the locations, we had Tom, W4UOC at Police Station, Larry at A4QO, Brian, N4BNA, Grant in red because he stayed overnight. He pulled an all-nighter at Fire Station 51. Tim, WK4U, pulled an all-nighter at our 911 call center. We had Stuart at the call center. Stephanie was at Station 52. I was at home. We'll talk about that in a minute. Fred, here's Fred at Station 51. Brett, N4BTA, did a heroic job working with the North American Mission Board out of his home QTH, helping with communications between the North American Mission Board and Puerto Rico. So he put in, he's still working on it because they still need his help. If you look here, there's a link to our October 2017 e-news. Grant wrote a great article on everything we did with more details on what Brett did on that. So you might want to take another look at that e-news. We also had Nathan, AB4GA, William, KM4, RKU did an all-nighter at Station 52, and Pavel did an all-nighter. AC4PA did an all-nighter at Station 54. We went around the clock with them. So we got the release the next morning. I just want to read this. We also encourage you setting up an ARRI station at your home QTH. Some people like to run, I like to stay put, so I'm rationalizing that it was okay for me to do that. But it's fully understood that ham radio operators are not first responders. Our primary responsibility is for the safety of our families and homes. We would only be asked to individually respond if we feel that our families and home are safe. I like being at this station, put in about over 30 hours over 2 days. Had this gone longer, obviously I would have faded, and we would have first gone to the rest of the 31 volunteers, or we would have been asking more people to help us out. But one of the capabilities, again, we didn't have to do it, but we have, not only can we send email through RF fairly locally, the WinLink system on HF will let us contact stations several hundred or even thousands of miles away, and we can send and receive emails. Let's say we're at a shelter, and Billy Bob at a shelter would like to let his mom and dad in California know he's okay, and we've lost phone and internet for several hundred miles. We can send an email via RF to any regular email. To the parents in California, they can reply back, and we can let Billy Bob know that his parents know that he's okay. So we can really provide that type of communication if it's needed. All right, that finishes this part of the talk that's in English. We can go back to Southern now.
So you've seen some of what we do. So what's required to be a member of ARRIs? There are no dues, technician class, or studying for the license. But ultimately, we will encourage you to set a goal and become at least a general class. No experience, we can train you. For most events, you can get by with a handy talkie, a ham shack on a belt. But we suspect you will ultimately create your own ham station at home, or at least in your vehicle. To become a vetted volunteer is critical, which is critical for some ARRIs deployments. Getting an ARRIs badge is important, especially today with what we see often in the news. In order to get that, you have to have a background check or a concealed carry permit, which you do go through a background check. A letter of recommendation from the emergency coordinator, a photo ID, and complete a list of incident command system courses, which can be found on the Georgia ARRI's website. The 4 courses that you have to take are part of the Homeland Security Administration, and they can all be studied for and taken online. So now that you've seen what we do, we hope you'll decide to join us and bring your interest and skills to our group. I think you'll find it interesting, you'll probably learn some new things, and you'll meet great people. If you want to join, you can download the application at the link shown on this slide here, and send the application to me. Then start by attending the meetings and checking in on our nets, Sunday evening nets. I think you'll find the Sunday evening nets fun, and you'll find the digital communications interesting. Thank you for your attention and for the club support of our group. If If you didn't get the link that Mike sent out, we can do that again. I did talk to a few people that said they didn't get the link. Tonight, there is a new flyer that's in the back. Again, Scott, KM4JXE, graciously printed those flyers for us tonight, so you can grab one of those flyers if you need information. With that, are there any questions?
How many members are in the North Fulton Aries group?
I think we have in about 22 or 23 members.
Yeah, good showing for that. Well, Mark. Excellent.
Just a quick comment. Having been in Ham for a number of years and doing a lot of public service events, especially between 91 and 96, 97, in that era, or 2007. It's a very rewarding feeling giving back via public service, to being in ham radio, and it's a way to give back to it. And it's just a wonderful, warm feeling that it's hard to explain, but it's part of it. Mike's nodding his head up there. Anybody that's done public service, you know what it's like, whether it's a bike ride, fireworks, or what it is. It's just a good part of paying back to them.
You are right. That's a very, very good point. Larry?
Just a comment. This is another thing too that the FCC takes into consideration when they're allocating the frequency is to work with the areas to do for public service.
A lot of the money is, if they could sell these bands, they would go for big bucks.
Yeah.
So we need to keep that in mind.
What sort of time commitment is it to be an effective member? And I'm sure there's a range, but
Well, we certainly want you to come to the meetings and also participate in the meetings. Just makes a stronger group. We like to really participate in field day and help the club with lots of things, putting up antennas, taking down antennas, and the stuff that Mike showed you. So, not a tremendous amount, but certainly attending the meetings, checking in on the net, and hopefully helping us with the community events that you saw tonight.
Thank you.
Back in the back.
I noticed you said you had, 26, 27 ARES members, but for the one event you had fielded 31 people. So I take it that you got some that were not ARES members, and you don't necessarily need people who have the ARES badges to participate in the events.
No, we'd like you to be a member, but if you want to participate in our activities, you can certainly do that, but we would prefer you.
I'd make a comment on that. The badge is really necessary if we were to go to places like Atlanta or out of the immediate area. So we know each other, we don't need to vet each other. The badge actually has a VV, which stands for Vetted Volunteer. So if it was a state activity where we were going out of our local community, they'd want us to have this vetting before we went in. So you don't need to be to have this to do the local activity.
One of the things that happened last year that this GEMA asked for, I believe it was GEMA that asked for volunteers, was that they had some fires down in South Georgia near the Okefenokee Swamp, and they were having a hard time communicating in such a big area. In those cases, having a badge just makes it easier to volunteer and to help. They know you've been vetted, so it's just much easier.
May I make a comment about that? The Georgia Aries Mat is looking for people in the Aries group. and that is Mutual Assistance Team, and it's a statewide group of people that bubble up from each Aries group who are exceptional performers who are chosen by their EC and recommended. So keep that in mind as a possible vertical mobility. We are looking for people like that. And it's not that we're taking people from the locals. You will help us and we will help you. That's how that works. So we share.
Very good, Larry. We appreciate that.
I'll just mention too, to get started, you really don't have to be a member. You can just go to our net on Sunday evening, check in, you're listening to the net control, just participate. You don't have to be an official Aries member. You're a licensed operator. You're more than welcome to participate and chime in and have a little experience and get to know us a little bit better.
I just wanted to thank you, Grant, for all you guys helped us out on AmGym for the parking that day. And it was just, everything was very smooth. You guys had it all handled.
Thank you. Yes.
If you were at Ham Jam, the parking lot was pretty far away from the auditorium. And we had us in these vests. Martha isn't here anymore. Martha said this is a garish yellow. She really doesn't like it. And she said it's not her color. So I told her I was trying to see if we can get some blushing pinks. Those weren't available. But anyways, we were on the whole path between the parking deck and the parking area and the auditorium. And Stephen came up with a term. He was telling all the visitors, follow the yellow vest road. So that's what got, and they were following it, and it made it very easy for them to find their way. Bob?
How much do those beautiful vests cost?
ARRL is selling them now. Before they had a chintzy one, they're selling this better one. I forgot what the price is, $20, something like that. And they've got the writing on the back.
Oh, which, by the way, is a really handy thing to have in your car if you have to change the tire.
Or if you're walking a
Less
dog.
likely to get run over.
Yeah, I was thinking about walking in the evening.
Yeah, if you're walking a dog early morning.
Well, just the thing, we look pretty official when we go to these events, like I told you at the Lantern Parade. I do have to admit the most common question that I'm asked is, where's the closest porta potty? Was there more questions? How are we doing for time? We're pretty well done, yeah. Okay, thank you.